This past weekend, the climber Alex Honnold summited the Taipei 101 skyscraper, which stands at 1,667 feet. He did it, as he did El Cap before, without ropes, without any safety net, and he did it in 90 minutes. So, for those doing the math at home, obviously, if he fell, it would have been pretty much certain death. It was extremely high stakes. The mental fortitude it takes to concentrate for that long is pretty unbelievable. And we're always unpacking elite performance on this podcast, and there are no more elite performances than climbing a skyscraper without ropes. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk specifically about something that relates to all of us. You might look at Alex Honnold and think, he's climbing skyscrapers. What could we possibly take from that performance that I can use in my life? Well, it's two concepts from psychology that relate to each other. One's positive felt experience, and one's called situated cognition. And the best way to think about it is it's essentially your body's wisdom, its ability to feel rather than think its way to success and peak performance. And it's useful to Honnold in climbing skyscrapers, but it's useful to all of us because the way you look at Alex and you see him flowing and in the zone when he's climbing like that, that is really a state that we can all achieve in our own respective ways in our own respective crafts. And we're going to talk about how you can get into that state using these concepts from psychology today. This is Excellence Actually. I'm Clay Skipper, joined today by Brad Stahlberg. Brad, in your book, In Way of Excellence, you talk about situated cognition and you talk about Alex Honnold in the very first chapter. So why don't we start by defining that term, what it means, what it is, an example of how it's used in the world of performance.
Situated cognition is a term that was coined by Richard Sennett, who is a sociologist who studied craftspeople. So woodworkers, physicians, artists, carpenters, home builders, construction workers, potters, sculptors, so on and so forth. And what he found is that at a certain point of one's career trajectory, you can attain this sense of being so at home in your body when you are doing your craft, when you are doing your work, that you are no longer using your mind to think. You are thinking with your body. So the amateur artist will go through a checklist and will have all of these deliberate thoughts about what they need to do next as they are creating the piece of art. The same is true for a woodworker. But a master of craft can enter into these zones where they are just thinking with their hands, in their heart, in their gut, and they are completely situated, again, in themselves and in their act. Now, Sennett did not study athletes at all. What's fascinating is that when I interviewed Honnold, he described very, very much exactly what Richard Sennett was saying. So he was telling me that when he is doing one of these big wall climbs, in this case against the wall of a skyscraper, he's not thinking about what's going to happen. He told me that if he's thinking while he's on a climb, that's a really bad sign. He is just feeling his way forward. And it got so far to the point that when he visualizes a climb, he's not visualizing it to try to think about what he's going to do. He's visualizing how different parts of the climb will feel so that when he's on the climb, he can try to recreate those feelings. And what he also told me is when he's feeling something different during a climb than what he visualized, that's a sign to lock back in, do some thinking, figure out why he's feeling something different, and then try to create the feeling that he knows is going to propel him forward. And during the broadcast of the Taipei 101, Emily Harrington was doing color commentary, and she's a phenomenal climber in her own right. And I counted, she used the word feel like 14 times during the broadcast. So this is not just something that Honnold does. This is something that all these climbers do. Thinking is not beneficial to performance when you're out there on the wall. It's got to be felt.
Yeah, and it gets at what will be some of the tension today, which is, I mean, we're unpacking this feeling, but we're going to have to necessarily intellectualize it to talk about it. But it is sort of this tension, like how do you explain the feeling? But we're starting, I think, by defining some terms here. So situated cognition. We had an episode with Hilary Hahn, who also makes an appearance in The Way of Excellence. A violinist, Grammy-winning violinist, has been playing since she was 6. I think she's been playing for almost 4 decades, if not more than 4 decades now. And when we had her on, she described playing this exact same way. You know, she said, in preparing for it, I obviously have the sheet music and I think about, playing each part. I get really rigorous in my preparation. But then when it comes to actually playing the music, she's like, I just in the note and I'm trying to feel, again, the stuff's a little hard. It's a little ineffable. She talks about, I'm trying to feel where the note wants me to go. Doesn't want me to go into the next note. Doesn't want me to stay here longer. And the way she talked about that, again, it was just very based in feelings rather than thinking her way through the piece.
I heard the same thing from the surgeons that I interviewed for this book. I talked to courtroom lawyers, and even they said that when they're actually arguing a case, they're not really thinking their way through the trial as much as they're feeling what they ought to do next. And I even reported out groundbreaking mathematicians. And even mathematicians describe their breakthrough ideas as feelings. They're following a hunch. They don't say, I'm up at the whiteboard and I'm grinding away. They said, no, like I have this hunch that I feel, and then I follow that hunch using my brain.
I remember reading, I can't remember what book it was. Maybe it was The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul, but she talks about some study that was about traders. And it was basically a correlation between traders who could sense their heartbeat, which was used as sort of a stand-in for interoception. So how well you're in tune with your body's internal signals, and their success as a trader. So like the more in tune they were with their body's signals, the more profitable the trades they made because they actually were able to listen to these hunches and feelings.
And we've talked about this offline, Clay, that when you and I write and edit especially, we're often not thinking about the edit. We're kind of like feeling what sentence sounds better, what paragraph should come where. And I just was absolutely floored when I came across this quote from George Saunders, who is my favorite fiction writer, I believe one of yours too, Clay. And he says that when he's editing, he's guided by an inner knowing. These are his words, not mine. The subconscious feels things. It prefers things. It finds this more fun than that. And maybe it doesn't even know why. And yet I find it's best to say it's such moments as you wish.
Yeah, and that George Saunders is a perfect example of this other idea of positive felt sense. And I think this and situated cognition are very similar, right? They have a lot of overlap. But just to give another definition here, positive felt sense, you can think of as the bodily sensation that something is right, aligned, or moving in the right direction. It's sort of almost like a pre-verbal yes you can feel in your body even before it registers in your brain or before your mind can articulate why. And I want to be very clear that I'm in no way, shape, or form comparing myself to the great George Saunders, but there is a sense, and maybe people have had this experience if they've had to write multiple drafts for a presentation or even just an application for school or something, or for a grant. There's like you get your first draft down, right? And you can be like, oh, it's not quite right. And then the next day you go back in and you fiddle with some things and you're like, oh, it's getting better. I think this is the subconscious that Saunders is talking about. And there's a moment where you're like, oh, it clicks. And that feeling of like it clicking into place, I think is the positive felt sense.
So now hopefully y'all understand these terms, and my guess is many of you have actually had the experience of positive self-sense or situated cognition. Let's talk about the actual tactics to bring this about in your own craft, because Saunders is guided by an inner knowing, but Saunders wasn't guided by an inner knowing in 7th grade when he was first learning composition. So there's a model that I love because it really gets to the heart of how we make progress in just about any domain, and it's very applicable in tactical. And this model is called the 4 phases of competence. And the first phase is unconscious incompetence. So this is when you don't know that you don't know what you're doing. You are brand new to writing. You don't know grammar. And at this phase, what you need is you need the Blue Book of Grammar, and you need a coach, a mentor. You need someone to help you get your bearings and to understand what good even is. Because if you don't know what good is, you can't feel your way towards good. The second phase then is conscious incompetence. So this is when you know that you don't know what you're doing. And this is still a very effortful, trying, thinking phase. You can't trust your gut as a trader if you don't know how to trade well. Like, you've got to understand the patterns intellectually before you can rely on your subconscious or your gut or whatever you want to call it to get you there faster. The third phase is conscious competence. So this is when you know that you know what you're doing. The final phase is what's called unconscious competence. And this is when you're not even aware that you're doing it right, you're just doing it. This is Honnold on the side of a building feeling his way forward. This is Saunders editing. This is a surgeon in the OR that is just locked into the zone. And if you were to ask them what they were doing, they would stop and tell you, but that's not on their minds when they're actually in the middle of a case. what I love about this model is twofold. The first is that if you are new to something or you're relatively novice, it gives you a really nice progression that you should expect and some good heuristics for what you should do at each phase of the progression. If you are more advanced in your craft, what I love about this model is the fact that no master ever just sits in unconscious competence forever. What makes a master is that they know where on that ladder they need to be and what tools they need to use. So it's also really beneficial because you as the performer get to ask yourself, like, am I in the right phase right now or should I be in a different phase? And I think everyone that reaches unconscious competence should make sure not to spend too much time there. You should go back to conscious competence because that's like where you're refining, you're learning, you're growing. This is where Alex Honnold is doing the visualization and thinking about what the climb ought to feel like before he's just feeling his way forward. Because I think the trap with this conversation more broadly is that we can get a little bit woo-woo and people can be like, oh, like we're just going to feel our way to our best performance. And this is all about getting in the zone and it's mystical and it's magical. But if you don't know where you're trying to go, well, then you can't rely on your feelings to get you there.
Yeah, and I think that gets at one of the first ways we can talk about or tell people how to train this, which is you have to put in the reps. There's no real way to get to situated cognition or positive felt sense without practice, right? And so I saw an interesting distinction between learning and practice. And learning you can think of as sort of passive absorption of knowledge. You could be watching YouTube videos, you could be reading a cookbook. And then there's practice where you actually have to go out and you have to make the recipe. You have to get off of YouTube and go practice the golf swing. And that practice allows you to get to build skills rather than just have knowledge of what those skills are. And so I think that's like the first big thing is you got to actually practice doing this. It's developing your own intuition in a way. And for me, I actually think that like development of intuition speaks to the stakes of what this is or like the so what of this conversation. Because I can imagine people listening are like, well, I'm not into crafts. Like I'm not a crafts person. I'm not pursuing excellence in a specific craft. I mean, I think most people listen to podcasts probably are. But if you're feeling that way, what this really is about, I think at the end of the day is getting to know yourself. And this is coming back to an idea we talk about a lot, but like we engage, speaking of me and you and Steve, in the pursuits we do because it allows us to learn about ourselves, right? Like I love to run. I love the way running makes me feel. But really what I love is like it has allowed me to learn about myself and get in touch with my intuition. Same with writing, same with meditating, same with a lot of the stuff I've done. And I think in this day and age where you really don't have to think for yourself if you don't want to because you can just get fed, algorithmic slop and your taste can be developed for you. If you don't get in touch with your own intuition and you don't have a craft or a way to work towards this positive felt sense or the situated cognition, you can really go your whole life without knowing what you want, right? And so for me, it's like, it really gets to why the stakes of this are so high. It's not just about climbing a skyscraper or being the best surgeon you can be or being the best cook you can be. It's really about getting to know yourself and knowing what you want, what your values are.
Oh, I love that so much, Clay, because at the end of the day, like what us humans crave is to feel situated in ourselves and situated in the world. And our nervous systems did not evolve for thinking. Okay, for the longest time, all knowledge was pre-cognitive. The conscious cognitive brain is fairly late in evolution, but our hardwiring that goes back millennia to the earliest species is built on feeling our way forward. That's how bacteria survived. That's how the earliest multicellular organisms survived. And we did evolve from those organisms. So we have like this deep felt sense, what Saunders calls his ritometer or whatever the exact term was it for. Like we all have that, like that we're programmed with that. If we lose touch with it in our overthinking, kind of overanalysis world, not only do we never perform our best, but we never really feel at home in the world. Because what separates humans from AI is that we don't just think our way forward. We're not just 0-1 reasoning. We're not just predicting the next best thing based on a model of a gazillion inputs. We also have this nervous system that is in this affective, with an A, this feeling conversation with the universe. And tapping into that is exactly what we're meant to do. it's why these peak experiences are so transcendent. It's why we are so confident in at home in the world and satisfied. And God forbid I even use the word content when we're just doing the damn thing without our thinking mind disrupting us and throwing a million thoughts our way. But it's why like I get so stoked talking about this topic because, yeah, it starts with Alex Honnold on a wall, but then you realize just how central it is to all of our lives. And I've yet to meet someone that doesn't prefer to be operating from a sense of feeling than thinking. Like thinking just disrupts these moments.
How should people think about training this? I think of something like writing, obviously very specific to us, but as you said, we had to learn the fundamentals of grammar and syntax and all that. And then we get to a point where we can flow sometimes. But now when I'm stuck and I feel like I want to get back to this sort of, like when I'm not in flow or in the zone for a long time and I don't have unconscious competence, one way that's helpful for me is just like free writing, right? Like journaling, just like getting up and writing and not editing, not paying attention to that meter of is this good or is this not good? And that's a way for me to try to like get back in touch with that feeling of what it's like to feel my way into writing if I'm finding myself thinking about it too much. But that's like very specific to writing. I'm trying to think of other examples for people who are not writers that might be helpful.
Well, I think that the first thing that I was going to say is now I'm guilty of using a running example is like put tape over your watch. So instead of staring at your watch during the run, put tape over it and then come and check back in with the data.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to just train yourself to feel what a threshold run should feel like. In every craft, just about every craft has the equivalent of a watch that you can put tape over. So for writing, putting tape over the watch might mean not trying to edit at the same time you write. Because oftentimes what happens is you're writing and then you go back and you read the sentence. And then that's kind of like looking at your heart rate and being like, well, did I get this right or not? Instead of just running. So putting tape over the watch is just write and then come back and edit after. Putting tape over the watch in a surgical case is, yes, you need to go through your checklist because they're super appropriate for quality. But at a certain point when you're into the case, if you are just like in the zone, give yourself permission to be in the zone, but make sure that your surgical nurse or the other physician scrubbing in has the confidence, and there's a culture around you where if you mess up, they're going to say, stop, you're messing up. That is kind of putting tape over the watch, but the watch is still there, so you can still check in with it. So figure out like what's the metaphorical watch in your craft and then put tape over it, but then come back to it. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say that I'm going to take from writing but apply more broadly is when I am stuck writing and I can't really feel my way forward, one of the best things to do is just to read really good books. Because I can also feel in my body when I'm reading a good book and like I get that feeling back. And subconsciously, I'm sure what's happening is my nervous system, right? My mind-body system, because it's a feeling, but my brain is also involved, is connecting what I loved about that Saunders sentence to what I'm feeling in my body. And then I get to try to recreate that feeling in my own work. So do the equivalent of reading great books for your craft. If you're a musician, listen to other great music. I think that so often when we study from other people or we apprentice, we think of it just as intellectual, not as trying to also feel in our bones what's so great about it, because that kind of teaches us like what that should feel like when we're on the right path.
I guess one way to think of it is you're always on a spectrum between control and freedom or looseness or play. And like when you're looking at your watch and you're looking at your heart rate, you're trying to control, right? You're like, I want to be in zone 2. I want to have this type of heart rate. And when you cover it, that's sort of it's a mechanism to allow you to get more into the play space. Same with writing. If you're writing without editing, having that meter in your head, instead of worrying about, is this good and controlling the prose, you're just sort of like letting it flow and see where it goes. Oliver Burkeman actually just wrote, I like his newsletter a lot. It's called The Imperfectionist. And he just wrote about how free writing for him is an exercise in unclenching. I'm going to actually read a quote from him. He says, if you're like me, none of this comes naturally. Time and again in creative work and life in general, I find that my default response to anxiety, overwhelm, deadline pressure, or other difficulties is to clench, to tighten up, brace myself against the world, and try to hold it at bay. And the reason I like the clenching metaphor so much is because, again, to bring it back to running, now we've done it multiple times in this podcast to honor Steve. Some of the best sprinters in the world, what they know about how to sprint is that they need to not be tense. They need to not tighten up. They need to unclench. A relaxed muscle is a fast muscle. So I think that is an interesting way to think about this, right? Are you forcing and trying to control, and are you clenched? Or can you go towards the other side of the spectrum and be loose and fluid and flexible and playful?
I also think it's important to talk about that just because you don't have this great feeling tone doesn't mean you still can't perform well. There are times when it's just really tedious and it's not fun and you are having to think and your feelings are kind of awry or you don't feel good. And then your brain has to come on, right? Like it's what Honnold told me. Like if he's feeling off on the wall, that's actually a sign that he needs to bring his cognitive brain back on to think, to problem solve why. And he said there are climbs where he's doing a lot of problem solving and those climbs are not as enjoyable. Sometimes they're terrifying, but he still makes it to the top. So I think the risk with this framework is that in some ways you get addicted to flow. And then you tell yourself a story that the only way you can write well, the only way you can have a difficult conversation, the only way you can climb, the only way you can do surgery is if you're in flow. When the fact of the matter is that like we're often not in flow.
Yeah, and I think it's not getting, as you said, it's not getting attached to the idea that I need to be in unconscious competence all the time. It reminds me of our conversations we've had about happiness too, where it's like, if you expect to just be in happiness all the time, or you expect to be in unconscious competence all the time, or, you know, to take it into a meditation framework, if you expect to be in enlightenment or nirvana all the time, like it's just not realistic. So you need to have the flexibility and the expectation that you're going to move through multiple levels.
That is excellence, actually. Like that is what separates excellence from flow, right? You can be a flow junkie and just chase the zone, and that's fine. But excellence includes all of the stuff that happens before you get into the zone, and then all of the stuff that you have to do after you get into the zone. You can't just get addicted to being in the zone. Performance doesn't work like that.
All this talk about preparation and putting in the reps in order to fine-tune your intuition, to sort of become a sommelier of your own feelings, makes me want to play this clip that I saw of Honnold on Rich Roll talking about how he came to be this legendarily fearless climber that he is.
The scene in Free Solo just kind of shows us like, oh, his amygdala doesn't work, he's different, whatever. But like with enough exposure to certain stimulus, you desensitize yourself to it. Like it's not that my amygdala doesn't fire, it's that my amygdala wasn't firing for that level of stimulus. But typically that will light somebody's fear response. But that's because they don't spend their whole life getting scared for their life. I've spent my whole life getting completely gripped, like scared out of my mind all the time. People always like to see someone doing something outlandish or different, and they're like, well, that must be because they're just fundamentally different. And I'm kind of like, no, I can do it because I've spent 29 years spending 5 days a week training at that thing, consistently trying things that are hard for me, like literally pushing hard my whole life.
What's so interesting about that is it's often said that Honnold's amygdala, which is like the fear center in one's brain, doesn't work like the average person's amygdala. And that he went in and got some neuroscience testing and it was just like not very reactive. And we'll never know if this is nature or nurture. Nature being he was just born with an underreactive amygdala and that's why he doesn't feel fear, or if it's nurture. And to me, what this clip lends itself to is Honnold's experience of this is very much that it's nurture. Like the reason he doesn't feel fear is because he's exposed himself so many times to terrifying situations that they're no longer scary. Now, maybe 7-year-old Honnold was just like a complete maniac and didn't feel fear and he's misremembering. But I think what Honnold is saying is, yeah, like my amygdala might not light up, but it's not because I was born that way. It's because I've gradually essentially gained like a weird kind of anti-fear fitness because I've put myself in all these situations. I've felt fear. I've come out on the other side of that fear. And now my amygdala is not reactive. And this happens all the time in clinical anxiety, because in clinical anxiety, you have the opposite of Honnold. You have an overreactive amygdala. And how do you bring that down to normal is you expose it to the thing that it's scared of over and over and over again. And eventually you realize that, hey, there's not actually anything to be afraid of by being out in public or by being near spiders or by driving on icy roads or whatever it is. And then the amygdala like resets. So it's almost like Honnold maybe just exposed himself into this kind of amygdala of it doesn't flinch at anything. Or he could have been born that way. Again, like we'll never know. But to me, this clip is Honnold saying like, bro, I wasn't born this way. I trained this.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that he brings up. And, you know, there's another quote that I saw that Alex wrote to himself after he climbed El Cap, the 3,000-foot wall, also free soloing without ropes. And he was like reflecting on what it took to get there. And he wrote a note of what he would say to his 18-year-old self. And he said, right now, this is quote, Right now, you're afraid of so many things: strangers, girls, vegetables, falling to your death. That's fine. Fear is a perfectly natural part of life. You will always feel fear. But over time, you'll realize that the only way to truly manage your fears is to broaden your comfort zone. It's a long, slow process that requires constantly pushing yourself, but eventually you'll feel pretty darn good and you'll climb big walls just like this. So yeah, again, nature, nurture, I think to suggest that he's wired the exact same as the rest of us neurologically is probably not the case. But I think the clip from Rich Roll and this quote both suggest that that's something we can all work towards, right? You just, if you move that outside line of where your comfort meets fear further and further and further and further, constantly exposing yourself to your fear, then you can do some pretty amazing things, even if it's not climbing a 1,700 foot tall skyscraper. One last concept I wanted to bring in here, a spiritual concept, is something called Wu Wei, which is the art of non-action. And I found this to always be a very frustrating concept because it's sort of like effortless effort or trying not to try. It's one of these paradoxical ideas that it's like, okay, that sounds cool in theory. But I think this idea of positive felt sense or situated cognition actually allows us to understand it a little better, because I think of the idea of trying not to try as being like going with what feels good. And I'll try to make that concrete by talking about it in a work or productivity sense. So like sometimes I will, because I time block out my day, I'll have something on my to-do list that's next up that when I get to it, I just can't will myself to do it. And sometimes I have to, right? Like I write on deadline. I sometimes have to, my feelings are not always going to line up with what I need to do. But if I'm not on deadline and I get to a task and I'm like, this just isn't happening. Or I go down to the gym to do a workout and I'm like, my body's just not there today. Instead of giving up entirely, I try to think about, okay, what is something that does match the energy that I have? How can I scale down the workout? How, instead of doing a 90-minute deep work block, can I instead get in my inbox and knock out 25 minutes of emails, which takes a little less focus, a little less creative effort? And so that to me is the art of Wu Wei and trying not to try and effortless action. It's like figuring out how your energy is flowing and how you can match it to tasks so that you're not doing nothing, but you're doing something. And so I think that's another way that like having a sense of how you feel and what feels good and going towards what feels good can actually have a practical aspect and get applied to like getting work done, getting things done, getting physical activity in.
That's right. And it's just, I mean, so Wu Wei comes from Warring States Chinese philosophy. And it, long before any Western concept of flow or being in the zone. The other interesting thing about Wu Wei is that Wu Wei is associated with what like Confucius and Confucianism called day. And day is charisma. So a person with Wu Wei has day. You're just attracted to them. And you're attracted to them because they are being themselves and going all the way, which is kind of what we talked about. Like they're trying not to try. They're just doing. They're just flowing. However, you don't get Wu Wei from saying you're going to get in the zone. You get Wu Wei, and this is what happened in Warring States China, from taking on these massive apprenticeships. So you train like 30 years to be a swordsman or a butcher, and then when you finally complete that apprenticeship, you have your Wu Wei. So, I mean, I'm always looking for convergence. What does that sound a lot like? It sounds a lot like the 4 levels of competence.
I think to wrap up today, I just want to bring in one more quote from Alex. This was in an interview he did with the New York Times, and I think it's a nice thought to end on, and it relates to what we're talking about here. And so basically at the end of this interview, he was asked, what does he hope viewers who watch this skyscraper climb take from his attempt? And Alex said, quote, "My hope is that people watching it will at least see the joy in it. Like when you're a kid and look around and think it'd be amazing to climb up there. As an adult, that gets hammered out of you. People ask, why would you do that? That's dangerous. Do you have insurance? All that type of stuff. But there's something to be said for maintaining that childlike joy of just looking at it like, that is amazing. I want to do that." And, something I harped on a lot today is this idea of you just have to put in the practice. You have to put in the reps and you have to figure out a way to stay playful with it. And so I think bringing in joy and that childlike desire to discover and explore is a good place to end today, because it will allow you to develop your intuition, which will help get you to situated cognition and positive felt sense. So with that, it's a wrap. Please go buy The Way of Excellence by Brad Stulberg if you have not done that yet. please leave a rating, a review for the show. That really helps. If you want to share the show, that also really helps. This is the best way to support us. Buy Brad's book, leave a review, a rating, share the show. We'll be back next week with another episode. As always, take care of yourselves and be excellent to one another.